Destination alternate fuel, which shall be. Where a destination alternate aerodrome is required, the amount of fuel required to enable the airplane to perform a missed approach at the destination aerodrome, climb to the expected cruising altitude, fly the expected routing, descend to the point where the expected approach is initiated, and conduct the approach and landing at the destination alternate aerodrome. Where two destination alternate aerodromes are required, the amount of fuel, as calculated, required to enable the airplane to proceed to the destination alternate aerodrome, heliport, which requires the greater amount of alternate fuel. Note: the departure airport may be selected as a destination alternate. Final reserve fuel. For turbojet aircraft, is amount of fuel sufficient to hold for 30 minutes at 1,500 ft above airport elevation in ESA, calculated with the estimated landing mass on arrival at the alternate or the destination. Overweight landing reporting procedure. In the event of an overweight landing, flight crew must follow the below reporting procedure. Inform OMC after landing as soon as possible. Make an entry in the aircraft technical log ETLB, including the aircraft's weight at landing, a description of the landing characteristics e.g., smooth, positive, firm, hard, vertical speed at touchdown. Submit OSR. Expedite climb. The flight crew may use the expedite climb mode temporarily to clear a specified altitude or to match a constraint. Press expedite push button on the FCU. The AP receives and maintains green dot speed. There is no benefit to use the expedite climb mode above flight level 250 because the Mach corresponding to green dot is too low to maintain an increased vertical speed. When selecting expedite push button with slats, flaps extended, the targeted speed is S or F depending on the configuration. To revert to normal climb, push altitude knob, climb mode will engage. Note: pulling Alt knob, VS knob or Speed Mach knob also disengages the expedite climb mode. Pressing expedite push button does not disengage the mode. Flight progress. When overflying a manually entered waypoint, check track and distance to the next waypoint. Check the wind and update it if the current wind is significantly different. When overflying the waypoint, OR at least every 30 minutes. Check fuel. Check FOB ECAM and fuel prediction FMGC, and compare with the computerized flight or use the performance application of the EFB. Check that there is no fuel leak. Check that the sum of the fuel on board and the fuel used is consistent with the fuel on board at departure. If the value is abnormally negative, suspect a fuel leak. If the value is abnormally positive, suspect a fuel quantity overread. Caution. This check must also be performed each time a fuel imbalance procedure is necessary. Perform the check before applying the fuel imbalance procedure. If a fuel leak is confirmed, apply the fuel leak procedure. Immediate return to origin airport. If the second flight plan has been prepared for an immediate return to the airport of origin, revert to heading mode, then activate the second flight plan. Perform a DIR to the appropriate waypoint. If the second flight plan has not been prepared for an immediate return to the airport of origin, enter the departure airport ident in the new dest field. Perform a lateral revision at the new destination. Select Approach, Star, Via, Transition and Insert. Check and insert the temporary flight plan or continue with next revision. When cleared to divert, Perform a direct to the suitable waypoint. Enter QNH, wind, MDA, MDH, landing config. Check RAD nav page. Adverse weather operating limitation. In order to ensure operational safety during approach and landing in adverse weather conditions, thunderstorms, thunderstorm rain, heavy rain, shower rain, the following limitations must be strictly applied. Visibility wind requirement for approach and landing. Reported RVR must be greater than published minima plus 100 meters or reported visibility must be greater than published minima plus 300 meters. In all cases, reported visibility shall not lower than 2,000 meters. Maximum crosswind component gust included less than 10 knots. ND wind can be used at altitude lower than MDA, DH. At or below 1,000 feet AGL. Cross-check visibility, RVR and wind width. ATC is mandatory and ensure no active thunderstorm within 05 miles moving toward the landing flight path. Flight crew requirement. Captain must be the pilot flying. Flight crew must stay vigilant and ready to execute a go-around procedure throughout the approach and landing phases. Given the unpredictable nature of adverse weather conditions, maintaining situational awareness and making proactive decisions are crucial. Crew should frequently check the landing condition with ATC in order to decide whether to continue or to initiate the missed approach. The crew is forbidden to start or continue approach, landing when the weather is expected worse, with visibility dropping rapidly to required minima for approach and landing in adverse weather condition. Below MDA, DA, the crew must immediately initiate a go-around, or reject landing at low altitude if visibility significantly deteriorates or if the visual cues required for a safe landing are lost. The PM is responsible for closely observing all parameters, including ND wind, and must actively call for a go-around if any parameter deviations are detected. In case the PF fails to initiate a reject landing necessary, the PM must immediately take over and execute the procedure. If a rejected landing is no longer possible due to the deployment of thrust reversers, and a loss of visibility occurs during the rollout phase, the PM should actively provide directional guidance to the PF to ensure runway centerline alignment is maintained. Unstable approach go-around. At stabilization height, PM must monitor and call out any exceedance of parameters during approach. At any level below the stabilization height, if any of the criteria in stable approach are not met, then PM shall announce unstable approach. Go-around, and an immediate go-around shall be flown. Passing the threshold, if a long landing beyond the touchdown zone is expected, then the PM shall announce unstable approach. Go-around, and an immediate go-around shall be flown. PM must challenge the PF by announce deviations of set targets and monitor response from the PF. If there is still no corrective action by PF, then a mandatory takeover procedure must be done. Convective weather operation. Weather detection. Always consider that a convective cloud may be dangerous, even if the weather echo is weak. Remember that the weather radar detects only water droplets. Frequent lightning may indicate an area with severe turbulence. Remember that the turbulence function detects areas of wet turbulence only. Avoidance decision. Establish an area of greatest threat based on the locations and shape of the strongest weather radar echoes, and on the meteorological knowledge of the flight crew. This area of greatest threat is a zone where the crew estimates that the weather conditions are too dangerous to fly in. The weather hazard prediction function indicates zones with a high probability of weather hazards such as hail or lightning. Avoidance of the detected weather always has priority over avoidance of the weather hazards. As a priority, apply the recommendations to avoid storms, and avoid hazard areas as much as possible. Initiate your avoidance maneuver as early as possible. As the aircraft gets nearer to the convective weather zone, the information from the weather radar often becomes partial. Consider a minimum distance of 40 nautical miles from the convective cloud to make the decision for avoidance maneuver. Avoidance technique. If possible, perform lateral avoidance instead of vertical avoidance. Vertical avoidance is not recommended, particularly at high altitude, due to the reduction of buffet and performance margins. Some convective clouds may have a significant buildup speed. Lateral avoidance. Deviate upwind instead of downwind. Usually, there is less turbulence and hail upwind of a convective cloud. Avoid the identified area of greatest threat by at least 20 miles. Apply an additional margin if the convective clouds are very dynamic. Vertical avoidance. Avoid flying below a convective cloud, even in visual conditions, due to severe turbulence, wind shear, microburst, lightning strikes and hail. If an aircraft must fly below a convective cloud, the flight crew should take into account all indications: visual, weather radar, weather report, pilot report before making final decision. For flight above a convective cloud, apply a vertical margin of 5,000 feet from the area of greatest threat. Weather radar operation. Manual tilt mode. Taxi, takeoff. Manually and gradually tilt up to scan weather maximum 15 degree up. Then set tilt to 4 degree up. Check the departure path. Climb. Adjust the ND range as required and decrease the tilt as the aircraft climbs. Compensation of the altitude increase to avoid overscanning. Level flight, cruise. Adjust ND range. Regularly modify the tilt to scan the weather ahead of the aircraft. When the weather scan is done, adjust the tilt so that the ground returns appear on top of the ND. In cruise, the following ND ranges provides good weather awareness. 160 on the PMND. 80 on the PFND. Use shorter ND ranges to track short-distance weather. Descent. During descent, adjust the tilt to maintain the ground returns on top of the ND. Approach. Set the tilt to 4 degree up. This tilt setting 4 degree up prevents the display of too many ground returns. Automatic tilt control. Taxi, takeoff. Manually and gradually tilt up to scan weather maximum 15 degree up. Then set tilt to auto. Check the departure path. In flight. Adjust ND range as required. Set tilt to auto. Use manual tilt for storm cell analysis, then tilt back to auto. Regularly perform manual scans to enhance weather awareness, then set tilt back to auto. In cruise, the following ND ranges provides good weather awareness. 160 on the PMND. 80 on the PFND. Use shorter ND ranges to track short-distance weather. Flight crew incapacitation. General. Flight crew incapacitation is a real safety hazard that occurs more frequently than many of the other emergencies. Incapacitation can occur in many forms, that range from sudden death to partial loss of function. Sometimes the flight crew does not have any symptom before incapacitation. Detection. In order to help with the early detection of flight crew incapacitation, the crew resource management (CRM) principles should be applied. Correct crew coordination that involves routine monitoring and oral cross-checks. The absence of standard callouts at the appropriate time may indicate incapacitation of one flight crew member. If one flight crew member does not feel well, the flight crew must inform the other flight crew member. Other symptoms, for example incoherent speech, a pale and fixed facial expression, or irregular breathing, may indicate the beginning of incapacitation. Action. In the case of flight crew incapacitation, the fit flight crew member should apply the following actions. Take over and ensure a safe flight path. Announce, "I have control." If the incapacitated flight crew member causes interference with the handling of the aircraft, press the sidestick push button for 40 seconds. The time required of 40 seconds includes the time necessary for AP deactivation if AP engaged and the time for offside sidestick deactivation. Keep or engage the onside AP as required. Perform callouts challenge and response included and checklists allowed. Inform the ATC of the emergency. Take any steps possible to contain the incapacitated flight crew member. These steps may involve cabin attendants. In order to reduce the workload, consider early approach preparation and checklists reading, automatic landing, use of radar vectoring and long approach. Land at the nearest suitable airport after consideration of all pertinent factors. Arrange medical assistance on board and after landing, providing as many details as possible about the condition of the affected flight crew member. Request assistance from any medically qualified passenger, except for flight with only 2 flight crew members on board, i.e. freighter or ferry flight. Equal time point. The operational flight plan must show the equal time point ETP between origin and destination or between en route alternate and destination for 1 engine out cruise from ETP to destination or en route alternate or 2 engine in the case of a 3 or 4 engine aircraft. Low-level cruise from ETP to destination or en route alternate. Normal cruise between origin and destination. Note 1. Although time and fuel requirements are equal whether flight proceeds to destination or diverts to alternate, the distances are equal due to tail or headwind. Note 2. The low-level ETP is computed at 14,000 feet or 10,000 feet cruising level. Zero fuel weight and zero fuel weight CG. The gross weight and CG computation is as follows. The flight crew enters the zero fuel weight and zero fuel weight CG in the INIT-B page. The FMGC computes the gross weight and CG from the zero fuel weight CG inserted in the INIT-B page, the fuel quantities from the fuel quantity indicator, the fuel flow from the FADEC. This current gross weight and/or CG is used for FM predictions and speeds, for ECAM display gross weight only, for MCDU gross weight and CG, by FAC for characteristic speed computation for PFD. The FAC computes its own gross weight and CG from aerodynamic data. Gross weight and CG FAC computed are used for minor adjustments on the flight control laws. Zero fuel weight entry error and operational consequences. If the pilot enters erroneous zero fuel weight on MCDU INIT-B page, this will affect as follows. Gross weight and, to a lesser degree, CG, computed by FM are erroneous. This induces the following consequences. The FM predictions and speeds are erroneous. Incorrect gross weight and CG on MCDU fuel predict page. Incorrect gross weight displayed on ECAM. Characteristic speeds on PFD are erroneous. SRS mode guidance is affected if computed VLS is above V2 as inserted in the MCDU perf takeoff page. Gross weight FAC computed, which is based on gross weight FM computed on ground, will be updated only once airborne through a specific slow calculation using AOA information. Note: in flight, if the FM and FAC gross weight differ from a given threshold, a check gross weight message is triggered on the MCDU. V-alpha prot, V-alpha max, V-stall warning are not affected since based on aerodynamic data. Erroneous fuel on board entry. As long as the engines are not started, the FM gross weight is erroneous and above-mentioned consequences apply. Once the engines are started, the fuel figures are updated and downstream data update accordingly. It should be noted, however, that the FOB on ECAM is correct since it is provided from fuel quantity indicator data. Operational recommendations. Zero fuel weight entries should be cross-checked by both crew members to avoid entry error. If the check gross weight amber warning is displayed on the MCDU, a discrepancy exists between the FM computed gross weight and the FAC computed gross weight. The crew will compare the load and trim sheet figures with the FM gross weight and fuel used. If an obvious entry error is detected, FM gross weight will be updated on the MCDU fuel predict page. If FM and load trim sheet gross weight are in accordance and appear to be correct, the FAC computed gross weight should be suspected AOA sensor problem. If FM and load trim sheet gross weight are in accordance but load trim sheet gross weight is suspected, characteristic speeds should be extracted from QRH. Noise abatement departure procedures. The noise abatement procedures is an operational procedure for the climb phase to provide noise levels reduction to areas close to the airport or distant from the airport. The procedure can be performed by two different methods. Noise abatement procedures 1. Intends to reduce noise levels close to the airport. Noise abatement procedures 2. Intends to reduce noise levels in areas distant from the airport. For both methods, the flight crew must initiate the thrust reduction after the required minimum altitude. The flight crew should not apply noise abatement procedures during significant turbulence or wind shear. Note: in addition, the operators can develop alternate operator-specific procedures and optimize thrust reduction, acceleration altitude considering all constraints. The operators must comply with local noise procedures. Position crosscheck technique. The principle consists in comparing the FMS position with the radio position aircraft real position. The flight crew inserts a radio ident in MCDU prog page which provides a bearing, distance relative to FMS position. Then, the flight crew compares these values with raw data received from the navade that indicates the real position of the aircraft. This enables to quantify the error. On the ND, the flight crew can compare the positions of the needle and associated DME distance with the nav aid symbol and associated distance. DME bearing and distance indicate the real position of the aircraft. The range markers indicate the distance associated with the nav aid symbol. These markers provide a bearing, distance, in relation to the FMS position. Position update. In case of an obvious and major map shift noticed by specific messages such as check aircraft position, FMS1 FMS2 POS diff, The aircraft position may be updated on the MCDU Prague page. Two techniques are available. The recommended technique is to carry out a FMS update over a beacon by pressing the update key when the flight crew estimates that the aircraft overflies the beacon using the associated needle. The potential error induced is approximately 4 to 5 miles. When the position update is achieved, the EPE estimated position error is automatically set to a higher value and the navigation accuracy is low. The second technique consists in updating the FM position when flying over a point, bearing, distance with reference to beacon raw data needle plus distance rather than the beacon itself. The potential for error is far less when the distance is greater than 60 nautical miles. The flight crew will keep in mind the potential 180 degrees error on bearing. Ice crystal. Clouds are made of particles of water that can be either liquid or solid. Ice crystals are very small solid water particles. In some areas, there may be a very high concentration of ice crystals that may have adverse effect on the aircraft. Areas of ice crystals are usually next to, or above the core of convective clouds that have high-intensity precipitation. However, areas of ice crystals may sometimes even be several nautical miles away from the core of the associated convective cloud. When ice crystals get in contact with a hot surface, they melt. Depending on the type of surface, a water film may appear. On the windshield, this water film creates not expected appearance of rain at temperatures too low for liquid water to exist. If there is a specific airflow towards a zone of the aircraft where water can build up, accretion may occur and create a block of ice. This is why flight in areas of ice crystals may result in various effects, for example engine vibrations, engine power loss, engine damage, or icing of air data probes. Detection of ice crystals. Ice crystals are difficult to detect with the weather radar, because their reflectivity is very low due to both their small size and solid state. In addition, in areas of ice crystals, the flight crew should not expect significant icing of the airframe. This is because ice crystals bounce off cold aircraft surfaces. This is why even the ice detection system does not detect ice crystals, because ice crystals do not build up on ice detectors and visual ice indicators. However, areas of ice crystals are usually associated with visible moisture. Ice crystals can be indicated by one or more of the following. Appearance of rain on the windshield at temperatures too low for rain to exist. This rain is usually associated with a shish noise. Small accumulation of ice particles on wipers. Smell of ozone or St. Elmo's fire. Aircraft TAD indication that remains near 0 degrees Celsius due to freezing of the TAD probe. Light to moderate turbulence in IMC at high altitude. No significant radar echo at high aircraft altitude, combined with high-intensity precipitation that appears below the aircraft, or aircraft position downwind of a very active convective cloud. Operational recommendations for ice crystals. If possible, the flight crew should avoid flight into areas that have a high concentration of ice crystals. The following recommendations apply. Use the weather radar. Identify areas that have a strong echo, and perform a detailed analysis of the structure of the convective clouds. If necessary, use the weather radar manual modes for a more precise analysis. Pay particular attention to strong echoes below the aircraft and to downwind areas. To avoid convective clouds, comply with operational recommendations referred to as WXR operations in convective weather, particularly prefer lateral to vertical avoidance. Comply with the avoidance margins. Deviate upwind instead of downwind. If the aircraft encounters ice crystals precipitation despite avoidance action, and if this results in engines or probes misbehaviors, the published procedures and recommendations apply, and in particular, ECAM alerts related to engine failure or engine stall. ECAM alerts related to probe failure. QRH procedures such as the ones linked to unreliable airspeed indication, engine vibrations, engine relight in flight. Hard landing. Common factors inducing hard landings are late flare, high rate of descent, duck under forward sidestick movement during flare, over control of sidestick, late retardation of thrust levers power on landing, speed below VLS during flare allowing high pitch and low energy. Early flare may be required at specific conditions: high airport elevation, steeper approach slope, tailwind and increasing runway slope. Normal rate of descent during touchdown are between 120 to 180 feet per minute. Touchdowns with sink rates of 360 to 420 feet per minute, while less comfortable, are often mistakenly called hard landings. It should be understood that the expression hard landing, in the technical sense, refers only to a landing with a rate of descent of 600 feet per minute or higher. Reporting procedure. Hard landings shall be recorded in the aircraft technical log and the MOR, OSR shall be filed. Load 15 report. Whenever a CFDS Load 15 report is automatically generated after a landing, the pilot in command must annotate in the aircraft technical log. Suspected hard landing, Load 15 report automatically generated. If flight crew suspected a hard landing, that Load 15 report is not automatically generated, the flight crew shall inform MOC and OMC in advance. Maintenance will decipher the Load 15 report to determine the level of exceedance and if any necessary inspection is required before releasing the aircraft. Engine stall. An engine stall is the disruption of the airflow in a turbine engine. When the blades of the engine compressors stall, they are no longer able to compress the air from the front to the rear of the engine. In some cases, there may be a breakdown of the airflow, with the high-pressure air at the end of the compressor reversing flow and exiting from the front of the engine. If this occurs, it may result in loss of thrust. The engine stall should not take the flight crew away from their primary task, that is to fly the aircraft. An engine stall can be due to any of the following reasons: an engine degradation, compressor blade rupture, high wear, ingestion of foreign objects, birds, or ice, a malfunction of the bleed system, a malfunction of the engine controls, fuel scheduling, or stall protection devices, a significant disturbance of the airflow, wake turbulence, non-appropriate use of the thrust reverser after landing, or lightning strike. During takeoff, and at high power settings, the symptoms of a stall are one or more very loud bangs, usually compared to a shotgun being fired a few meters away, an instant loss of thrust, or even a reverse thrust, that causes a yaw movement, fluctuations of the engine parameters N1, N2, or N3. The engine may give the impression to pump. An increase of EGT. Engine vibrations. Flames may be visible from both ends of the engine. Inlet, tailpipe. Acrid smell in the cockpit. During cruise, and at low power settings, the symptoms of a stall are one or more muffled bangs, slow or no thrust lever response, fluctuations of the engine parameters. The engine may give the impression to pump. An increase of EGT. Engine vibrations. Acrid smell in the cockpit. Most of the FADEC have functions that regulate the airflow through the compressor to prevent stalls. Are able to detect stalls. Try to recover from an stall without flight crew action by modifying the airflow. When the FADEC detects an engine stall, the FADEC requests that the engine stall ECAM alert is triggered. The FADEC is not able to detect an engine stall in all cases. If the flight crew detects engine stall symptoms, the flight crew should suspect an engine stall and apply the QRH procedure. The engine stall procedure is not a memory item. Therefore, if a stall occurs during the cruise phase, the flight crew shall take the time to assess the situation before applying the procedure, as most of the times the FADEC will self-recover from the stall before any flight crew action. The engine stall procedure is as follows. When the flight crew has stabilized the aircraft trajectory, the flight crew first reduces thrust to idle on the affected engine. This action reduces the differential pressure across the compressor. This helps the airflow to become more stable. When at idle thrust, the flight crew checks the engine parameters on the EWD, particularly the N1, EGT, N2, N3. The crew should also check the engine vibrations on the engine SD page. The flight crew shuts down the engine if the fluctuations of the engine parameters, high EGT, or the engine vibrations persist, or the symptoms of the engine stall persist at idle thrust. If the engine parameters are normal, selects the anti-ice on, in order to increase the bleed demand. This reduces the pressure at the exit of the compressor, and helps the airflow to circulate in the engine turbine from front to rear. Then, the flight crew slowly advances the thrust levers, as long as the engine stall does not occur again. The engine response may be slow at high altitude. If the engine stall reoccurs, the flight crew keeps the engine thrust below the stall threshold. Should not shut down the engine if the engine stall can be avoided. The flight crew should manually control the thrust on the affected engine between idle and the identified stall threshold for the remainder of the flight. The flight crew must report any engine stall for maintenance action.